What if everything we thought we knew about ancient humans was wrong? Not a little wrong, completely upside down. Scattered across Asia and the Pacific are massive stone structures that defy logic, engineering, and even time itself. Built by hands we can't identify, using tools we've never found, for reasons no one remembers. No writing, no blueprints, just impossibilities carved in rock. So ask yourself, if we didn't build them, who did? And more importantly, why? Welcome to 50 prehistoric structures that humans couldn't build. Just don't expect answers. The stones aren't talking, and neither is what left them. Before we go any deeper down the rabbit hole, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This channel dives into the strange, the ancient, and the absolutely unexplainable every single week. And while you're here, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight? Noon? 3 a.m.? And your curtains just moved? Let's see who else is wandering the timeline with us. Ishi-no-Hoden, Japan. It sits there like a glitch in the Earth's rendering engine, 500-ton rectangular stone, hovering just barely off the ground, as if caught in the middle of levitating. Welcome to Ishi-no-Hoden, a slab so surgically precise in its geometry, so arrogantly massive in its isolation, that it looks less like something carved and more like something summoned. It doesn't blend into the landscape. It arrests it. Found in Hyogo Prefecture, Japan, Ishi-no-Hoden is unlike anything nearby. No tools, no inscriptions, no infrastructure suggesting how or why it was made. Just one giant, gravity-defying monolith, shaped like an off-kilter Lego block on the verge of snapping into a cosmic puzzle. Archaeologists will give you polite explanations, religious symbolism, burial intention, forgotten quarry project, the usual. But try asking them how ancient stonemasons supposedly chiseled perfectly flat surfaces into granite with no apparent scratch marks, or how they moved ice if they ever did. The answer is often a nervous chuckle, followed by a detour into natural erosion. Local folklore offers more colorful answers. Some say it was crafted overnight by the gods. Others say it floats, literally floats, though the illusion is caused by a shallow pool beneath it. But even that trickery has its own absurdity. The bottom is too perfectly contoured to sit flush with the water. It almost suggests anti-gravity, or that the rock isn't from here at all. Here's the riddle. Why would a civilization exert the colossal effort of shaping a single 500-ton rock, only to leave it behind mid-gesture, like a forgotten idea? It's as if the act of carving was more important than the end resultless. A construction, more a statement. But to whom? And then there's the elephant in the excavation. This thing isn't unique in its defiance. It's just the opening act. Because if you take a few steps further, several hundred kilometers underwater, you'll meet something even weirder. A monument that isn't quite a ruin and isn't quite natural. In fact, no one agrees what it is at all. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. Submerged beneath the crystal blue waves off Yonaguni Island lies a megalithic enigma that has scholars, scuba divers, and conspiracy theorists locked in a silent, underwater staring contest. It's a formation, set of formations, really, that resemble temples, staircases, and symmetrical terraces, but also, somehow, erosion. Welcome to the Yonaguni Monument, or as it's sometimes called, Atlantis's drunk cousin. Discovered in the mid-1980s by a diver hunting hammerhead sharks, the site quickly launched into cultural infamy. Photos emerged of perfect right angles, 90-degree walls, long corridors, and what looked suspiciously like a stepped pyramid. A prehistoric acropolis, but with coral reefs instead of tourists. Proponents of the "this was definitely built" theory have a field day. They talk about stone tool marks, underwater roads, and ancient tsunami catastrophes that submerged once great civilizations. The site is sometimes linked to the lost continent of Mu, a mythological sibling of Atlantis that supposedly sank beneath the Pacific. Grand claims, bigger questions. But mainstream geologists say, nope, natural sandstone, tectonic shearing, wave erosion, end of story. They argue that all these right angles and stair-step features are the accidental artistry of Mother Natura woman, who just happens to love symmetry when no one's watching. Here's the problem. Both sides might be half right. The Yonaguni monument sits at the messy intersection of pattern recognition and philosophical despair. It's too precise to dismiss and too chaotic to confirm. If it was man-made, it predates all known complex architecture in Japan. If it's natural, it's a rock pretending to be an empire. And lurking just behind this debate is an even weirder question. Why does it look haunted? Divers routinely report a deep sense of being watched, as though the structure doesn't want to be found, but merely observed, judged even. Nature doesn't usually feel like that. Abandoned buildings do. Still, no matter how long you study it, the monument offers no answers, just more ridges, more shadows, and more stairs that go nowhere. It's a temple, or a tomb, or just a really obsessive earthquake. And if you think we've hit peak ambiguity, hold that breath, because the next structure isn't underwater, but it might be speaking in code. Khao Chan Ngam Rock Art, Thailand. Let's set the scene. A cliff face in northeastern Thailand, adorned with ancient rock art. Stick figures, yes, but also something stranger. Geometric patterns. Parallel lines, spirals, massive grooves. Shapes that don't scream hunter-gatherer creativity so much as they whisper ancient trigonometry. Welcome to Khao Chan Ngam. At first glance, it looks like your standard prehistoric graffiti wall, but on closer inspection, some of these etchings start to rebel against the narrative. Because prehistoric humans weren't supposed to care about symmetry, or gradients, or geospatial alignment, and yet, there it is. The figures are oldsome, say 3,000 years. Others place them much earlier, but the exact dating is murky, because, again, these aren't typical cave doodles. Interspersed among clear anthropomorphic images are designs that feel lifted from a geometry textbook or an alien message board. Some of the carvings stretch several meters. They're deep, precise, and carved into rock faces that would have required scaffolding or levitation to reach. Either option seems excessive for people who hadn't invented the wheel. So what's the story? Were these just bored artists with a sharp rock and an obsessive streak? Or were they communicating something, mapping the stars, marking ley lines, or documenting an encounter? Researchers typically file this under religious significance, the all-purpose drawer for things we don't understand. But no tools have been found nearby, no associated dwellings, no graves. Just this surreal gallery, like a message carved into the cliff to outlive the messengers. The local myths don't help. They say giants once roamed this land. Some versions suggest serpent gods. But the one recurring theme? These carvings were never meant for us. Which leaves us here. A massive mural that predates context, culture, and maybe even human patience. A structure not built, but burned into stone like a cosmic Achinga warning, a welcome, or just a very persistent hallucination. And if that wasn't confusing enough, the next stop on our descent into ancient absurdity will make you question if geometry is even real. Because somewhere deep in the hills of Vietnam, stone blocks are doing something they were never supposed to do: organize themselves. Chop Chai Megaliths, Vietnam. Atop a quiet hill in Phu Yen Province, Vietnam, lie several massive stone bars too rectangular to be natural, too pointless to be human. These are the Chop Chai Megaliths, and they're either the most patient rocks in Southeast Asia or a puzzle left behind by something or someone with very strange architectural priorities. These megaliths aren't part of a temple or a tomb. They don't form a circle, a path, or a boundary. They just exist, strewn like forgotten dominoes. Long, rectangular stone slabs, some weighing multiple tons, positioned in a way that almost suggests order but never quite delivers. And that's the charm, or the threat, depending on how you see it. They seem to be almost organized. There's no evidence of carving tools, no decorative motifs, no nearby structures to contextualize them. Just a hill and a question. Local geologists suggest they're natural formations, volcanic activity, tectonic pressures, erosion, the usual suspects. But none of those suspects can explain the sheer rectangularity of the stones or the eerie flatness of their surfaces. At some point, natural begins to feel like a cop-out, like saying a chessboard just happened to form in the wild. And then there's the unnerving quiet. No artifacts have ever been found at the site. No ancient pottery shards, no burial remains, no signs of ritual use. It's like the stones appeared on their own, or were placed here and then scrubbed of every trace of intent. Even local myths don't offer mucha rarity in Vietnam, where nearly every stone has a ghost story. Some whisper of giants, others claim the stones sing, but only to those about to die, cozy. The strangest part? Satellite imagery shows vague linear patterns among the stones, hinting at a larger design, now half buried or eroded, or hidden. The kind of pattern that might be obvious if you were standing a few hundred feet taller than a normal human, but we aren't, and so we guess. It's not a building, and it's not a ruin. It's something else, something that was either interrupted or abandoned by choice. But if you think Chap Chai is confusing, just wait until you get to Mẫu Sơn Mountain, because over there, the stones don't just lie around uselessly. They cluster, like they're planning something. Mẫu Sơn Mountain Megaliths, Vietnam. High in the Mẫu Sơn Mountains near the Chinese border, the mist rolls in like a curtain being drawn over a secret. The landscape is littered with stone formations, some shaped like tables, others like shrines, others like, well, no one really knows. But they all share one quality: they shouldn't be here. These megaliths dot the ridgelines and valleys like relics from a civilization that never left a name behind. Some are circular, others rectangular. Many appear positioned dangled in strange ways, grouped in deliberate clusters or aligned with local peaks. It's the kind of layout that makes archaeologists uneasy, too regular to be coincidence, too irregular to be conclusive. Some researchers argue these stones are natural products of freeze-thaw cycles, shifting plates, volcanic intrusion. But the problem with calling everything natural is that it doesn't explain the almost ceremonial vibe. Many of the stones seem oriented toward the horizon. Some even resemble altars or platforms, complete with steps and ledges. One massive slab has an inset groove running across its surface, clean, straight, and entirely too stubborn to be an accident. Local legends, of course, fill in the gaps. They speak of mountain spirits, sky lords, and ghostly processions. One tale tells of a long-lost city in the clouds, struck down by a jealous god and buried beneath stone. Another claims the stones are actually petrified, beings worshippers turned to rock for daring to touch the sky, which is, ironically, more coherent than most scientific papers on the subject. The megaliths themselves remain stubbornly mute. No inscriptions, no artifacts, no discernible pattern of use. Just silent stones standing in formation, waiting for someone or something to remember what they were for. And here's the kicker. No one has ever fully mapped the entire site. It's too remote, too overgrown, too inconvenient, which means the mystery might be larger than we even realize. Maybe the entire mountain is a structure. Maybe it isn't a mountain at all. But before you start building conspiracy castles in the sky, consider this. Just down in the valley, there's a field, a stone field, filled with massive rocks that look even more suspiciously arranged than these. And nobody can explain that one either. Ta Van Giáy, Stone Field, Vietnam. Tucked away in Vietnam's misty northwest, near the rural village of Ta Van Giáy, lies a field of ancient stones that no one can seem to explain, dismantle, or ignore. This isn't a burial ground. It's not a quarry. It doesn't look like a place anyone ever lived, but it feels intentional, like an unfinished thought carved into the earth. The field is dotted with massive rocks, some stacked, some laid out like puzzle pieces flung across the grass by a disgruntled deity. They're too large for simple agriculture, too placed for randomness. Local farmers plow around them, the way you walk around someone sleeping too peacefully to wake. There are no signs, no boundaries, no monuments, just presence. The rocks themselves are weird. Some appear etched with shallow pattern lines, grids, symbols that don't quite resolve into anything legible. Others are smoothed on one side, but jagged on the other. The kind of asymmetry that suggests human involvement, or an incredibly sarcastic glacier. No one has successfully explained how they got here, or why. Are they the remains of a forgotten megalithic culture? A ritual space? A calendar? A prank? Archaeologists have proposed everything from ancient burial mounds to natural erosion. And yet, no remains have been found. No bones, no urns, no tools, just stones. Waiting. Locals call them the talking stones, claiming they whisper in the fog. Some say they're the leftovers of a war between giants. Others claim they rearrange themselves at night. And why not? Their positions don't stay consistent across early photographs. Either the photographers were lazy or something moved. Here's a fun twist. Some of the rocks seem aligned with certain celestial event solstices, equinoxes, and star rises. But the alignments aren't precise enough to be conclusive. It's as if someone almost got it right, or didn't care if they did. It's a field that functions more like a question mark than a monument. A place where logic feels unwanted. And as you stand in that silent field, surrounded by impossible stones, one thing becomes very clear. They're not there for you. They never were. And if you think that's unsettling, imagine traveling hundreds of miles to a place where the stones don't just lie around. They stand upright, proud, stoic, and somehow judgmental. Batu Brak Megalithic Site, Indonesia. High in the hills of Lampung, South Sumatra, where the mist clings low and silence creeps like moss between the trees, you'll find Batu Brak, a megalithic site that doesn't really want to be found. There's no grand entrance, no carved path, no welcoming plaque, just a cluster of enormous stones, scattered and solemn, as though they'd fallen from the sky mid-ceremony and decided to stay. At first glance, Batu Brak looks like a graveyard for giants. Towering vertical slabs jut from the earth at improbable angles. Others lie flat, carved with abstract forms, deeply weathered faces, and mysterious indentations that serve no apparent function. Some appear to mimic human shapes. Others resemble nothing at all, unless you're willing to believe they were meant to represent something no longer remembered, or never meant for human comprehension to begin with. These aren't just rocks, they're placements. Some stones form linear paths. Others group into strange clusters with no consistent orientation. You could argue they were for rituals, or ancestral veneration, or ceremonial alignments, but you'd be arguing into the void, because Batu Brak gives you no answers, only contextless artifacts. There are no buildings, no tools, no writing, just the kind of silence that implies something was deliberately erased. And here's where it gets unsettling. Some of the stones appear cut, not cracked cut. Angular lines, polished surfaces, consistent dimensions. You might expect that from a culture with metal tools. Except the estimated age of the site pushes it back into the prehistoric long before metallurgy touched these lands. So who exactly was slicing stone like it was tofu? Local folklore, unsurprisingly, credits supernatural forces, spirits, deities, or giants, depending on which version you hear, Some even claim the site rearranges itself in the night. Others say it's a prison for ancient beings, turned to stone for crimes no one remembers. Archaeologists have documented the stones, measured them, photographed them, but they still tiptoe around the central question: why? Because once you ask that, you start spiraling. Was this a lost civilization we never found? A leftover from a global megalithic culture that predates recorded history? Or just the Earth playing a trick that happens to look like intention? And just when you think Batu Brak is strange, the next island over doubles down. There, you'll find megaliths shaped like chairs, as though someone very large and very judgmental once sat in them and waited. Nias Island megaliths, Indonesia. Off the western coast of Sumatra, Nias Island rises like a fist from the ocean. It's a rugged, rain-soaked land known for stone houses and head-hunting legends. But deeper inland, beyond the tourist gloss and ethnographic fascination, lies something far less understood: the megaliths, giant stone chairs, tables, altars, and monuments that seem less like architecture and more like statements from a culture that had something to prove. You'd be forgiven for assuming they're ceremonial. Some clearly are: thrones for ancestors, platforms for rituals. The kind of thing anthropologists love to overcontextualize with terms like communal memory and ritual space. But some of the megaliths are so enormous, so impractically positioned, that they break the script. We're talking multi-ton slabs placed on precarious hillsides, sometimes balanced on smaller rocks like giant stone seesaws. It's the sort of thing that makes you ask, why? Or, more accurately, how? Local tradition says they were carved and moved by hand, which is cute until you realize how much manpower that would require and how few people actually lived here at the time. Then you hear the other version, that the stones moved themselves, that the earth gave them form and they simply arrived, or that sky beings placed them down like chess pieces on a volcanic board. One particularly strange megalith resembles a high-backed stone throne, with armrests and a gently sloped seat, perched atop a hill with no path wide enough to move it there. If you wanted to move it now, you'd need a helicopter, which begs the question, who moved it then? And let's not ignore the vibe. These megaliths feel aware. They don't just sit in the landscape, they loom, like they're watching or remembering. Visitors often report a sense of being observed. Others say the stones feel warm to the touch, even in the rain. Local guides shrug. Old spirits, they say, or maybe giants. One thing is clear: these weren't built for aesthetics. They were built for impact, for permanence, possibly for someone who never came back. And if you think that's dramatic, buckle up. Because next, we head to a valley in Sulawesi where the statues are even stranger, some smiling, some staring, and none of them answering your questions. Central Sulawesi megaliths, Indonesia. In the heart of Sulawesi, deep in its green and brooding interior, lies a place that feels like it belongs on another planet. Valleys where enormous stone figures stand alone, silent, blank-faced, unblinking. Welcome to the megaliths of Central Sulawesi, where the stones have faces and none of them are smiling back. The area is dotted with statues, some human-like, others defiantly abstract. They range in size from barely waist-high to towering over the average person. And while a few are roughly carved, others are hauntingly smooth, with rounded cheeks, wide eyes, and enigmatic expressions. Some sit cross-legged, like they're meditating. Others look like they're trapped mid-thought. All of them face somewhere, but no one knows where or why. And then there are the vats, massive stone jars and basins carved from single blocks, some as big as hot tubs. Were they burial urns, sacrificial basins, bathtubs for gods? Take your pick. Because no one knows. No bones, no ash, no relics inside. Just stone containers that look like they've been waiting for millennia to be useful again. These megaliths aren't part of a city, or a necropolis, or even a recognizable pattern. They're scattered like seeds thrown by a bored deity. Some stand alone in rice fields, others hide beneath vines. A few are half submerged, peeking out of the ground like they're being swallowed. Dating them has been a nightmare. Some estimates place them around 3,000 years old. Others say they might be older, much older. But without inscriptions, the timeline is speculative at best. And the style? It doesn't match anything else in the region. Not the known tribal art, not the historic temples, not even neighboring megalithic cultures. Local legends are generous, of course. Some say these are the petrified remains of ancient being Shiros turned to stone for defying the gods. Others say they walked here, that they weren't always still. What's especially unsettling is their durability. Despite earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and monsoon-level weather, these stones endure. They don't just stand, they persist. As though whatever made them knew exactly what it was doing. And if that wasn't enough, just wait until we step into a valley nearby, one that has even more of these stone enigmas. Only this time, they're arranged, like a ritual. Or worse, a warning. Batak Toba megaliths, Sumatra, Indonesia. In the mist-draped highlands surrounding Lake Tobate caldera of one of Earth's most violent supervolcano, stands a culture with its back to history and its face carved in stone. The Batak Toba megaliths are part of a land where legends grow like jungle vines and where stone sits heavier than memory itself. Here, scattered across quiet hills and riverbanks, are strange stone structures attributed to the ancestors of the Batak people, and maybe something else. These megaliths are not grand monuments. They're quiet, personal, and strangely unsettling. Stone chairs with high backs, carved in symmetry, headstones without names. Effigies with faces eroded but not erased. Each piece sits alone, isolated in space and time like the punctuation marks of a language no longer spoken. There's a tension here, a duality. Because while some of the megaliths are clearly Batak known, dated, culturally explained, others aren't. Some are older, much older. Stones with no carvings, but too geometrically deliberate to be natural. Some weigh multiple tons and sit miles from the nearest quarry, and no one knows how they got there. The official line is always the same: ritual, ancestors, reverence, but it never quite sticks, especially when you stand before one of the older stones and feel its absurd precision. Flat surfaces on rock that resist all attempts at shaping, grooves that look like machine cuts, corners so clean they could slice your thoughts in half. And the locals? They talk about giants, not metaphorical ones, real giants. Forest beings who once roamed the land and carved stone the way we mold clay. Some of these stories describe the megaliths as offerings to those beings, not from them. Others say the stones themselves are remnants of battles between entities whose names have been long, and very deliberately, forgotten. What remains is a contradiction. A people who carve stone to honor the past, and stones that seem to predate the people who revere them. Which came first? The ancestor or the monument? And if you think that's confusing, just wait until we move a few valleys over where the same story plays out again, only with jars, giant jars, lined up like soldiers awaiting orders that never came. Bada Valley megaliths, Sulawesi, Indonesia. Step into Bada Valley, and you're stepping into something else entirely. Not quite history, not quite myth, just something old and strange that refuses to explain itself. Here, surrounded by a bowl of misty hills and tropical quiet, are dozens of stone statues and monuments, each one weirder than the last. Let's start with the obvious, the statues. Some are humanoid, in the roughest sense. Big heads, stubby bodies, flat faces with wide, staring eyes. Others are more ambiguous geometric shapes, almost abstract, with no clear reference to anything biological. Many have arms folded across their chests. Some are smiling. Others aren't. Then there are the urns, massive stone jars, some taller than a person, carved from single blocks of rock. Smooth on the inside, like they were meant to contain something important, maybe sacred, maybe dangerous. No bones have been found in them, no ashes, just emptiness. And the unnerving possibility that they're still waiting. The site has no script, no language, no instruction manual. Just artifacts arranged across the landscape like echoes of a forgotten conversation. You walk among them and feel like you've interrupted something. Or worse, arrived late to a ceremony you were never invited to. Local stories tell of Watu, the stone people, beings who lived here long ago and turned to stone when the world changed. Others say the stones were once alive and froze in place when the sun betrayed them. Some even whisper of celestial origins, that these beings came from the stars and chose stone as a disguise. No one knows how the statues were carved. The stone here is hardigneous and resistant. Bronze Age tools would have struggled. Iron Age tools barely explain the detail, and there's no quarry nearby. So how were these things transported? How were they lifted, positioned, preserved? And here's the kicker. Bada Valley is just one part of a larger mystery, because just beyond its borders, in the wild heart of Sulawesi, there are even more megaliths. Some still buried. Some half submerged in the forest. Statues that look like they're rising from the earth, or maybe sinking back into it. Next stop, a national park that feels less like a protected area and more like a containment zone. Lower Lindu National Park Megaliths, Sulawesi, Indonesia. Lower Lindu National Park is the kind of place you go to lose signal, both literal and metaphysical. Tucked away in the mountainous center of Sulawesi, this park hides not just biodiversity but a stone-based existential crisis. Scattered across its dense forest trails, open clearings, and fog-drenched riverbeds are megaliths that range from slightly odd to "why is that smiling at me?" Some of these statues are well known and even named. Others are anonymous and terrifying in their ambiguity, like the statue with hands clasped in prayer, except the hands have 6 fingers. Or the one with a human torso but no discernible face, or the ones buried waist-deep in soil as if trying to claw their way back into the earth. There are also vats again, massive stone containers, their insides smoothed with an attention to detail that borders on obsessive. No one knows if they were for burials, offerings, or something stranger. One theory suggests they were part of a water purification ritual. Another claims they were used to store celestial energy. A third just calls them really, really weird tubs. But the park doesn't stop at statues and jars. Some of the megaliths are geometric blocks, perfectly rectangular, like ancient blueprints carved into jungle stone. They sit alone. They defy erosion. They quietly ruin the archaeologist's day. Carbon dating is useless here. These stones weren't made with organic materials, and there's no organic material on them. No moss, no tool marks, no graffiti, despite centuries of exposure. It's as though the stones resist time metaphorically, but actively. The megaliths of Lower Lindu aren't clustered like a town. They're spread out like a signal or a warning. Each one isolated, guarded by wilderness, sitting like a checkpoint in some ancient game we forgot how to play. Local belief says these statues have spirits. Some good, some malevolent. One tale warns that photographing certain statues will bring misfortune. Another says that the megaliths are just the visible part of something buried, like antennae poking out from a deeper system. And if you think this was humanity's doing, the next place might end that fantasy. Because in Gunung Padang, the mountain is the monument. Or worse, the monument is pretending to be a mountain. Gunung Padang, Indonesia. Gunung Padang doesn't just defy history, it tries to rewrite it with a smirk and a sledgehammer. Perched atop a lush hill in West Java, This site was once thought to be a modest megalithic terrace, the kind villagers might build for ceremonies or star watching. But as excavations deepened, so did the story. Because Gunung Padang, it turns out, might not be a hill at all. It might be a pyramid, a very, very old one. On the surface, the site appears tame enough. Rows of elongated basalt columns, stacked into neat terraces and platforms, arranged like someone tried to build Stonehenge using Lincoln logs. But dig literally, and you begin to realize that the stones don't stop, they go down. Layer upon layer of ancient masonry, extending deep beneath the visible structure. Some scans suggest it might reach more than 20 meters down, far beyond what any known civilization in the region was capable of constructing at the time. That's when the dating estimates start to go feral. Some geologists claim the deepest layers could be 10,000 years old. Others go further 20,000 reals, maybe more. At that point, you're not just breaking historical records, you're rewriting the entire prehistory of Southeast Asia, and possibly kicking sand in the face of every known timeline of human civilization. Mainstream archaeology clutches its pearls. The idea that a pyramid predating Egypt by millennia could sit in the middle of Java with no written record, no cultural memory, and no sibling structures to support it? Too absurd, too inconvenient. And yet, there it is. The stones themselves are strange, volcanic andesite, stacked in hexagonal columns as if grown, not quarried. They fit together too well for crude tools. Some stones show signs of having been melted, shaped, or molded, none of which should be technologically possible for the era they supposedly belong to. Locals always knew the hill was sacred. They spoke of it as a place of power, of thunder. Some say it hums. Others avoid it entirely, claiming strange dreams and odd phenomena when visiting. The government has restricted parts of the excavation. Preservation, they say. But it smells more like containment. And if Gunung Padang is a buried pyramid, then the next site down the line feels like the postscript to a forgotten book, scattered stone figures, half animal, half human, and all unsettling. Welcome to Pagaralam. Pagaralam megaliths, Sumatra, Indonesia. Pagaralam sits like a dream, caught in a clearing, quiet, green, and humming with the kind of secrets only stone can keep. Nestled in South Sumatra, this highland area is dotted with megaliths. But these aren't your average standing stones or geometric curiosities. No, these megaliths have faces and expressions, and sometimes teeth. The stones here are carved with an eerie blend of humanity and myth. Some have oversized heads with wide, gaping mouths. Others sport stylized limbs, bent into poses no human body can maintain. A few even depict entire scenes, figures, riding animals, or being devoured by them. It's not art. It's not architecture. It's storytelling in granite, filtered through a consciousness we no longer understand. But the strangest part? No one knows who carved them. The area has been continuously inhabited by various cultures for centuries, but none claim ownership of the oldest stones. Oral histories speak of a time before people came from the coasts, that the stones were already there. Some villagers believe their spirits frozen in place. Others think they were brought here moved, not made. Archaeologists have tried to date the site, and the range is wide, 2,500 years ago, maybe older. Some megaliths appear partially buried, as though the earth is trying to swallow them back. Or maybe they're surfacing, rising slowly, like something remembering it has a body. The carvings themselves are primitive in execution, but sophisticated in intent. They communicate fear, joy, violence, reverence. One stone shows a figure holding its own severed head. Another cradles what appears to be a smaller, screaming version of itself. If these are myths, they're brutal. If they're records, they're worse. And yet, like many of these sites, there are no tools, no ruins, no cities, no clues. Just stones in a field, telling stories that no one asked to hear. Pagaralam is quiet now. No one lives among the stones. They're fenced off, lightly studied, and largely ignored. But they don't feel forgotten. They feel watched. And from these eerie carvings, we descend deeper into mystery and to the heart of a national park where the stones are not decorative but deliberate. They form patterns too complex for erosion and too inconvenient for explanation. Kerinci Seblat, National Park Stone Structures, Sumatra, Indonesia. Kerinci Seblat isn't known for its stones. It's known for tigers, jungle, mist, a rainforest so dense it can swallow entire histories without a trace. But look long enough between the moss and the tangled root sand, you'll start to see them. Stone formations, arranged, angular, artificial. No signs point you there. No trails are marked. These formations are scattered, like afterthoughts across a vast wilderness. Some are half-buried, peeking out of the soil like memories refusing to stay down. Others stand out, blocks aligned in what seem like rows, walls, platforms, always alone, never explained. Local legends talk about the old people, not their ancestors, but a race that came before, tall, strong, quiet. Some say they lived underground. Others claim they lived in the clouds. Either way, they're gone now, leaving only formations that mimic the bones of vanished buildings. The stones themselves aren't native to the exact locations they're found in. Some seem transported, massive blocks carried uphill, across rivers, through thick jungle. Why? No one knows. There are no burials associated, no artifacts, no inscriptions, just placement and precision. Geologists chalk it up to natural weathering, erosion, volcanic activity, but the angles are too clean, the alignment's too intentional. In one area, 3 stone slabs form a near-perfect triangle, each point facing a distant peak. Another spot features an elevated platform, 6 meters across, with stones laid like tiles. Nature doesn't do tiling. Researchers rarely explore the park's interior deeply enough to study these sites. It's inconvenient, dangerous, expensive, so most of the formations remain unexplored, unstudied, and unmentioned. Official maps don't mark them, guidebooks don't reference them. But the locals know. Hunters and foragers tell stories of hearing voices near the stones, of footsteps behind them when they camp too close. One tale claims a traveler tried to take a piece of one stone home. He was never seen again. It's a national park, yes, but it feels more like a forgotten museum or a sealed vault. And these stone fragments, they're not just ruins, they're leftovers, warnings. And if that idea isn't unsettling enough, just wait until we cross the border, because in the hills of Assam, India, you'll find something truly bizarre. Jars, giant stone jars, no labels, no lids, and absolutely no reason to exist. Giant jars of Assam, India. Tucked away in the verdant, forgotten hills of Assam, far from the noise of the modern world, are the silent sentinels of a mystery. No one asked to inherit massive stone jars, some taller than a man, scattered like ancient debris from a forgotten banquet of giants. They lie in fields, dotting the earth with eerie regularity, unaccompanied by any civilization, temple, or trace of their creators. The jars vary in size and shape, some squat, some slender, others monumental, but they all share one bewildering trait. They serve no clear purpose. No one's sure who made them, when, or why. And no, they're not the more famous plain of jars from Laos. These are Assam's own versionquieter, less studied, and far more enigmatic. These jars feel abandoned not just by their builders, but by the very idea of explanation. No inscriptions, no lids, no bones or ashes to suggest burial, just emptiness, volumetric puzzles etched into the land. Some theorists propose storage of grain or water, others suggest funerary rituals. But the sheer scale and number of jars make these explanations feel like afterthoughts, desperate attempts to stuff meaning into a void that has long since rejected it. The most disturbing possibility is the oldest, that these jars predate local memory entirely. Not just older than history, but older than the concept of it in this region. Tribal elders speak of spirits and sky beings, of stories passed down from ancestors who merely found the jars already in place and built their lives around them. Some say the jars fell from the heavens. Others whisper they are the fossilized remains of monstrous flora or once living beings turned to stone mid-function. Modern archaeologists barely mention them. There's too little data and too much discomfort, because these aren't structures, they're artifacts of intent. They imply an intelligence with priorities we no longer recognize, something that saw the earth as a blank canvas and the act of carving giant jars as significant. But the jars are only half the story. Because, as you head south into the lush hills of Meghalaya, something else rises from the ground. Towering stones arranged in lines and clusters, as if standing guard over secrets buried deeper than time. Khasia Hills monoliths, Meghalaya, India. Step into the highlands of Meghalaya, and the air gets thicker not just with mist, but with memory. This is monsoon country, where clouds drape the hills like veils, and the land itself feels ancient and alive. Among these hills stand the Khasia monoliths, massive upright stones, placed in formations that scream intention but whisper only silence. These monoliths are striking. Some rise over 20 feet high, slender and defiant, while others lie horizontally like stone coffins for gods who've forgotten how to wake. They're not randomly scattered. Many are grouped in clusters, arranged in vertical alignments, sometimes accompanied by stone tables or platforms. It's as if someone was building a skyline for the dead. Local tradition links the stones to clan ancestors, honoring the departed with vertical markers of permanence. Rituals are performed, songs are sung. And while that provides some context, it does little to explain the bigger questions. How these multi-ton stones were transported, lifted, and placed with such precision, and why some alignments seem astronomically intentional. Then there are the oddities. Monoliths without any known associated clan. Stones so old they predate oral records. And the strangest of them, perfectly shaped pillars in remote, inaccessible areas where no ceremonial function could reasonably exist. These are the wild cards, the ones that don't fit the story, the ones that raise eyebrows and lower voices. And like all good mysteries, these monoliths seem to invite contradiction. Some appear polished. Others show signs of erosion from centuries of rain, but with no moss, no lichen, as if nature hesitates to reclaim them. A few are reportedly magnetic, pulling compass needles ever so slightly off course. Anomalies, or warnings. Locals speak with reverence about the stones. Some are said to weep during storms. Others are called guardians, placed there by forces not entirely human. Even the most skeptical admit something about them feels aware, not alive, but alert, as if waiting. The hills are thick with fog, and the stones don't talk. But just west of here, another puzzle waits dolmens, circles, and stone markers from a different culture, arranged with an even stranger flair for geometry, burial, or code. In Kodagu, the dead may not be the only ones lying in wait. Megalithic burial sites of Kodagu, Karnataka, India. Deep in the misty hills of Karnataka, far from the urban sprawl and digital noise, lies Kodaguthe, land of coffee, warriors, and the dead. Hidden in its forests and tea-scented clearings are megalithic burial sites that seem almost too precise to be accidental. These aren't just graves, they're statements. Dolmen's large flat stones balanced atop vertical slabs like Stone Age coffee tables dot the landscape. Some are surrounded by standing stones in circular patterns. Others feature capstones so massive, so delicately placed, that you can't help but wonder who had the strength, and more importantly, the reason to put them there. Mainstream archaeology labels these as burial sites. But here's the catch. In many of them, no remains have been found. No bones, no ashes, no offerings. Just stones, stacked and arranged with architectural care in places where architecture had no business existing. The assumption of funerary use is based on shape alone. Which, let's be honest, is kind of like assuming all circles are pizza because they're round. Some of the capstones reach lengths of over 10 feet. They would have taken dozens of people to move, if not hundreds. But these are forested hills, with uneven terrain and no roads. How do you move a stone the size of a car over mountains without wheels, pulleys, or written plans? And then there's the geometry. Certain dolmens are positioned with precise alignments to cardinal directions. Others are nested in triangles or clusters that suggest astronomical awareness: sunrise on solstice, the moon at zenith. You could argue it's coincidence, but at some point, coincidence becomes cowardice. Local tribes speak of ancestors who communicated with the sky, of dreams sent through stone, of a time when the earth listened. The dolmens, they say, aren't for the dead, they're for the message. A message meant to be read not in language, but in placement, shape, shadow. And as you walk among them, in that dead silence, one thing becomes clear. These were not casual burials. These were calculations, instructions, maybe, coordinates. And just when you think you've parsed the pattern, the terrain changes again. Because farther into the Ghats, the stones stop making sense altogether. They start doing something else. Something harder to explain. Something that looks like precision but smells like illusion. Unidentified structures in Western Ghats, India. The Western Ghats are the spine of peninsular India, maze of peaks and plateaus clothed in thick green and older than memory itself. In these high-altitude wilds, where mist hugs the trees and time moves with geological slowness, strange stones sometimes appear where they absolutely shouldn't. Unnamed, uncatalogued, unwelcomed by the narrative of history. They're not temples, they're not forts, they're not graves, they're something else, isolated boulders with right angles carved out of them. Stacks of massive stones forming low, wall-like structures on sheer slopes, blocks seemingly cleaved in ways that defy the normal rhythms of erosion. And all of it too remote, too inconvenient, too utterly unclaimed by any known civilization. You won't find plaques here. No signs declaring their significance. No footpaths leading tourists to marvel at ancient wonders. These are ghosts in the stone, quiet defiance to the smug certainty of textbooks. They exist only in half-whispered field notes and the anecdotes of tribal herders who know better than to linger near them too long. Some formations stretch in long lines, as though tracing invisible borders walls that start nowhere and end in oblivion. Others form near-perfect cubes, as if quarried by precision tools. Yet no tools have been found, no inscriptions, no settlements, just these cold, deliberate geometries sitting in absolute wilderness. Erosion, the experts say, a particularly square landslide, or ancient seismic activity expressing itself artistically. But then you notice the alignment: some structures oriented precisely east to west, some mimicking star paths, some facing sunrise points on equinoxes, and suddenly, nature feels suspiciously literate. The local folklore doesn't try to explain it, just accepts. These stones were left behind. They belong to the mountain. In some places, people avoid the areas entirely, not out of fear but respect. The kind reserved for wild gods or broken machines, still humming faintly with forgotten purpose. There's a deep discomfort in these sites, a sense that what you're seeing was never meant for your eyes, and whatever built them, man, nature, or something in between, didn't care about being understood. And if these fragmented shapes disturb your sense of natural order, just wait. Because in Bihar, granite itself seems to have been tricked into behaving like polished marble, with no chisel marks, no hammer strokes, and no reasonable excuse. Rock-cut caves of Barabar Hills, Bihar, India, earlier period. In the dry heat of Bihar, beneath the stoic shadow of ancient hills, are caves so geometrically perfect they feel like a betrayal of their own age. These are the Barabar Hills caves, rock-cut chambers that seem less like they were carved and more like they were bored into solid granite with a laser-guided whisper. At first glance, they look like early Buddhist sanctuaries, modest, austere, symmetrical. But then, you step inside, and the laws of physics start to feel negotiable. The interiors are smooth mirror smooth, not for their time smooth, just smooth, like glass fused into granite. The surfaces reflect light in impossible ways. Sounds bounce off the walls with uncanny precision, echoing like chants inside a speaker box engineered by a perfectionist deity. The caves are dated to around the 3rd century BCE, supposedly built during the Mauryan period. The inscriptions match, the timelines check out, but the execution? That's where things start to crack. Because granite is notoriously resistant, it's not a cooperative material. Carving it with ancient iron tools should have left mark scratches, grooves, fatigue. But these caves bear none of that. Not even beneath the polished surface. It's as if the entire interior was sculpted without contact. Some researchers suggest techniques that have since been lost. Others mumble about advanced abrasives or slow, methodical grinding. But nothing fully explains the perfection, the acoustics, or the absence of trial and error. It's as though someone had a blueprint and the tools to make it real. And then there's the eerie simplicity. The chambers aren't cluttered with decoration. They don't boast religious excess. They just are. Like the function was something more primal: resonance, containment, communication. Local myths, of course, fill the gap. Some say the caves were built by gods. Others say demons used to dwell here before being driven out by ascetics. One tale even claims that the hills themselves are sleeping beings, and the caves are their mouths, places where words once echoed with divine meaning. The enigma isn't just how they were made, it's why. They weren't tombs. They weren't homes. They don't connect to any infrastructure. They're just impossibly smooth voids in impossible places. And if that doesn't itch at your sense of reality, the next stop might. Because in Sonbhadra, stones don't just sit, they point, they pulse, and sometimes they pull. Mysterious stones of Sonbhadra, Uttar Pradesh, India. In the craggy, sun-baked lands of Sonbhadra district, Uttar Pradesh, the rocks behave oddly. They sit too straight, stack too clean, align too purposefully. They hum, some say, not audibly, but in the way they refuse to be dismissed. These are the mysterious stones of Sonbhadra formations that blur the line between geology and geometry. They're scattered across ridges and valleys, far from any known settlement site. Massive, angular boulders that look less like they fell from cliffs and more like they were placed. Some stand upright. Some lie at diagonals too consistent for chance. Others form L-shapes, T-shapes, or stair-step configurations that shouldn't exist outside of intentional planning. What makes it stranger? Their magnetism. That's right, some of the stones mess with compasses. Not dramatically, but subtly. Enough to nudge the needle, enough to suggest that there's something inside or beneath them. Something metal, something energetic. There's no mining history here. No electromagnetic anomalies recorded, just anecdotal reports and a handful of nervous field studies that never went very far. Locals talk about stones that listen, places you don't visit unless invited, tales of animals refusing to graze nearby, of tools mysteriously vanishing when left overnight. You laugh until you don't. Geologists? They're split. Some blame magnetite deposits. Others say it's a hoax. But the stones persist, whether they're believed or not. Their alignments hint at cardinal directions. Some even point toward astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, constellations that have long since shifted. But the most disturbing idea? That these stones aren't just placed, they're part of something larger, a buried structure, a grid, a map. One theory claims the entire region is sitting atop a forgotten framework, an underground complex made entirely of stone, a terrestrial motherboard built in an age before memory. No excavation has gone deep enough to confirm or deny it. Sonfadra doesn't advertise its mystery. It's not built for tourism. The land is quiet, cracked, and strangely expectant, as if waiting for something to return, or to be reawakened. And the next site on this unraveling spiral of ancient stone isn't any kinder, because just across the border, a Buddhist stupa sits on the foundation of something far older and much more confusing. The stone city of Takht-i-Rustam, Afghanistan. Perched atop a lonely hill in the Samangan province of Afghanistan, Takht-i-Rustam is a Buddhist stupa wrapped in the kind of silence only geological time can produce. It's ancient, yes, revered, certainly, but there's something off about it. Something quietly wrong. Because while the upper structure has been dated and categorized, the base of the stone city beneath it refuses to cooperate with any known timeline. Let's start with what they admit. The visible stupa is carved downward into the bedrock, not built up from the earth. That alone is unusual. Imagine sculpting a cathedral by digging into a mountain. It's not just anti-gravitational, it's impractical. But someone, long before cement or scaffolding, did exactly that. With symmetry, with clean lines, with methodical steps leading into subterranean chambers that feel less like caves and more like systems. And then you go deeper. Beneath the stupa is a network of rock-cut rooms, passages, and columns. Some say they were monk cells or meditation chambers, but they're too large, too polished, too sterile. These aren't the humble dwellings of ascetics, they're engineered voids, not merely hollowed space, but designed absence, like a structure built to house something that's no longer there. The walls are smooth, some angles feel machine-cut, certain doorways are too tall for practical use. And while official timelines place the visible structure at around 2,000 years old, the stone beneath tells a different story. No clear dating, no tool marks, no cultural signatures, just silence and stone behaving suspiciously like architecture. And local legend? Oh, they've got theories. That it wasn't Buddhist to begin with. That it was already ancient when the monks arrived. That it was carved by giants, or gods, or something between. Takht-i-Rustam means throne of Rustam, referring to a Persian epic hero. But there's no throne. Only stairs that lead nowhere. Doors that open into rock. And a subtle suggestion that the hill itself used to be something else, something that has since gone dormant. There are places in this world that were never meant to be inhabited, only visited. Takht-i-Rustam is one of them. And if a rock-cut complex masquerading as a temple wasn't enough to rattle your sense of historical certainty, the next chapter brings you to an island kingdom where the dead don't rest beneath pyramids, but beneath mound sands. Some of them are too large, too old, and far too symmetrical to make sense. Dolmen burial mounds, Bahrain, earliest layers. In the blistering sun of Bahrain's desert landscape lie thousands of burial mounds, slow, rounded, and seemingly endless. These are the remnants of Dolmen, an ancient civilization once called the land of the living. But as you walk among these quiet hills of bone and silence, it becomes clear. Someone went to great lengths to bury something. Or someone. And not all of it makes sense. Most of the mounds are humble, single-chambered tombs, modest, Understandable. But then there are the others, the giants. Mounds so large they distort the terrain itself, multi-tiered, double-walled. Some even have corridors or internal divisions. These aren't graves, they're statements. And the oldest ones? They don't match the others. Their shape, size, and structure feel alien, not in a little green man kind of way, but in a what culture even thinks like this kind of way. They're older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. And yet, here they sit undisturbed, mostly unexplored, because their symmetry dares you to ask why. Some archaeologists chalk it up to a lost elite, royalty, nobility. But there's no evidence of wealth inside. No gold, no scepters, just bones. And in many of the large mounds, not even that. Empty sarcophagi, hollow chambers, like the dead never showed up for their own burial. Worse still, some of the mounds show signs of having been built on top of older structures, foundations that don't align with the upper construction. Stone layouts that feel like the skeletons of buildings or platforms, reburied by later cultures either out of reverence or fear, like someone found something and decided to hide it again. Ancient texts describe Dilmun as a paradise, a place where no one died, a holy city that became a graveyard, which makes these mounds less like tombs and more like warnings. This is where the immortal go to stay quiet. Satellite images show that some mounds are aligned in massive geometric formations, grids, spirals, even a few that resemble constellations, too large to notice on foot, too consistent to be accidental. And now, as we follow the burial trail into the desert, we'll find something else. Not tombs, not pyramids, but strange rings of stone in the middle of nowhere, tombs without bodies. Circles without centers, plans without purpose, ancient stone structures of Oman, lesser-known sites. In the bone-dry heat of Oman's deserts, beyond the beehive tombs that guide the tourist brochures, lie lesser-known stone formations. Remote, minimal, unlabeled. Circles of standing stones. Lines of boulders crossing vast empty flats, shapes visible only from above, like architectural blueprints drawn in defiance of time. You don't stumble upon these places. You find them, if you're lucky. Or if something wants you to. Most are tucked into the hills, far from roads, often near dried riverbeds or salt flats that haven't seen water in centuries. And when you arrive, it feels like walking onto a chessboard long after the game has ended. Some structures form perfect ringstones set into the ground, like the frame of a clock that's missing its hands. Others trace zigzagging paths, with no destination, no apparent function. No two formations are exactly the same, yet they all share one trait: intention. This isn't random geology. This is design, by someone who didn't care if you understood. The official explanations try to keep things grounded: primitive animal pens, tribal markers, ceremonial sites. But none of those answers explain the scale, or the orientation, or why many of these structures seem to mirror star constellations. Several align with solstices, equinoxes, or planetary rises, things that require observational consistency over generations, or access to aerial views we weren't supposed to have. Even more unnerving are the anomalies: stones that are magnetic, arrangements that resemble circuitry, sites where compasses spin or batteries inexplicably die. Coincidence? Maybe. But at some point, the desert begins to feel less like emptiness and more like encryption. The few who've studied these places often leave with more questions than answers. Some report dreams, others an inexplicable urge to return. A feeling that the stones are part of something larger, something only visible from above, or from a mind that no longer exists. In Oman, the silence is deeper than sand. The structures don't decay, they endure, and they do so with an attitude like they're waiting for something to be reactivated or remembered. And what comes next? A site where animals and architecture collide, where early civilization and unknown intelligence might have met, and neither party stuck around to explain why. Al-Magar site, Saudi Arabia. In the scorched hinterlands of Saudi Arabia's Najd Plateau, the Al-Magar site was quietly discovered, like so many ancient enigmas, by accident. But what they found wasn't just pottery or tools. It was something stranger. A carved sandstone figure, an animal, a horse, maybe, or something horse adjacent. The form was crude, but deliberate. The context, however, was all wrong. Too old, too advanced, too purposeful for what the textbooks say should be possible. The figure is estimated to be over 9,000 years old. That's Neolithic, pre-wheel, pre-civilization, at least. That's what we've been told. Yet this animal sculpture, clearly made with intention, suggests that people here were not only domesticating animals, but memorializing them in stone, which isn't just weird, it's offensive to our timeline. And then there's the rest of the site. Scattered remnants of structures, semicircular foundations, and strange stone configurations with no clear function. Some say they were homes. Others, corrals. Still others think they're ceremonial enclosures for rituals we've long forgotten or were never meant to understand. One arrangement in particular is circular, with a single opening facing northeast. Why? No one knows. But that orientation matches the rising of a certain constellation. And that constellation? Orion, the cosmic GPS of ancient monuments across continents. The official narrative now tries to reshape the site into a primitive village with a touch of symbolic carving, a charming bump in the developmental road. But something about Al-Magar refuses to shrink itself into simplicity. Its implications are too vast. It asks, who were these people? How did they get here? And why, in a landscape that swallows everything, did they decide to leave behind this? Then there are the outlier theory zones, not spoken too loudly in polite academic circles, that the horse wasn't just a symbol, but a messenger, that the people of Al-Magar weren't just early domesticators, but participants in an older, lost interaction between humanity and something else, something capable of passing down forms, memory, or warning. The site, of course, has since been mostly closed off. Preservation, they say, but perhaps it's just easier that way. Because just nearby, scattered across the Arabian deserts, are structures even less explainable, sprawling geometric traps that were designed for one thing only: coordination, across distances, across generations, across logic itself. Desert kites, Arabian Peninsula, prehistoric, unexplained origin. Fly over the Arabian desert, and if you know where to look or if the light hits just right, you'll see them. Massive V-shaped structures etched into the land, stretching for miles. These are the desert kites. So named because, from above, they look like simple stringed toys, but on the ground, they're anything but playful. They consist of two long, low stone walls, converging into a narrow neck that ends in a small enclosure or pit. The function, we're told, was to herd animals, gazelles, ibexes driven into the kite's arms, funneled, trapped, and killed. A prehistoric slaughterhouse, painted in stones. It's efficient, logical, except when it isn't, because these things are huge. Some stretch for over a mile, built in terrain where the nearest quarry could be dozens of kilometers away. Constructed by hand, stone by stone, by people who had no carts, no beasts of burden, no blueprints. And they're not rare. There are thousands. Across Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, even into Central Asia. Who coordinated this? Who mapped it? Who stood on a hill one day and said, "Let's spend the next generation moving rocks into kilometer-long shapes to catch dinner"? And it gets weirder. Some kites are connected linked by long, straight paths. Others form elaborate networks across valleys and plateaus, like the circuit diagrams of a forgotten civilization. Some even appear to form patterns, not for animals, but for the sky. Archaeologists still argue about their age. Some say 2,000 years. Others push back 6,000, 8,000, maybe older, no consensus, no documentation. Just stone walls in the sand, behaving like the remnants of a logistical system too advanced and too unnecessary for their supposed creators. And yet, they're real. You can walk them, touch them, stand in their dead center and wonder, who needed this? Not just the function, but the scale, the vision, the idea. Were they really for hunting? Or something else entirely? Signal systems? Calendars? Cosmic diagrams? No one agrees. But one fact remains: whoever made them wasn't working alone. And speaking of enigmatic collaborations just beyond the desert, baked into the remote basalt of ancient Arabia, are structures so perplexing they earned a nickname out of sheer frustration: the works of the old men. Works of the old men. Saudi Arabia, remote basalt formations. Somewhere between the fantasy of lost civilizations and the shrug of modern archaeology lies a category of things that simply refuse to be categorized. Enter the works of the old men, a sprawling patchwork of stone rings, lines, and geometric anomalies etched into the dark, volcanic basalt fields of northern Saudi Arabia. They're not walls, not fences, not forts. They have no doors, no roofs, no foundation logic. Just endless arrangement circular enclosures, spirals, pentagrams, chains of dots and dashes too large to grasp on foot, and only truly visible from the air. Thousands of them, some aligned, some random. All impossible. The name alone is a confession. The old men weren't specific people, they were a convenient placeholder. A label whispered by Bedouins when asked who could possibly have built this madness. No stories, no myths. Just resignation. The shapes vary. Some circles are neatly fitted with interior partitions. Others connect via lines that run arrow straight for hundreds of meters. Some look like giant wheels. Others resemble cells under a microscope. Most are completely isolated. All are in places no one should have bothered building anything. Satellite imagery reveals even more disturbing truths. Some works form clusters. Some mimic constellations. Some show symmetry so precise it would have required surveying toolstools that supposedly didn't exist for several millennia. Age estimates range wildly from 2,000 years old to 9,000. But there's no organic material to carbon date. No artifacts, no campsites, just the stonework. So the dates, like the meaning, are guesses wrapped in academic politeness. Even the construction baffles logic. Moving basalt heavy, brittle, irregularis a nightmare. And yet here it is, stacked and shaped by people who, according to all available evidence, should have been too busy surviving to play with sacred geometry. Were they symbolic? Religious? Astronomical? Defensive? Or none of the above? Some fringe theorists go further. They say these works were never meant for humans to observe from the ground, that they're messages, blueprints, landing pads, art for something looking down. Whatever the truth, the old men never left a manual. Just patterns in stone. Frustrating, vast, eternal. And next, we drift toward the Sieto, a site that once bustled with ships and trade, but holds in its oldest layers something far stranger than spice routes. Stone blocks with no builder, no signature, and no explanation. Kana Archaeological Site, Yemen. Perched on Yemen's ancient southern coastline, the ruins of Kana speak in the weary dialect of lost empires. Once a bustling port that hummed with incense trade and ship-bound pilgrims, Kana today is a whispering ruin of sun-bleached stones and half-swallowed walls. But beneath the layers of identifiable history lies something far stranger: blocks. Monolithic, crude, silent. They don't belong to the city's known architecture. They don't match the cultural scripts of its later inhabitants. And, perhaps most importantly, no one remembers putting them there. These unworked or barely worked stone slabs form a strange substratum beneath the city's recognizable layout. Buried under the footings of temples and roads, they occasionally jut out in defiance anomalous shapes, intruding into orderly ruins like forgotten words in a carefully edited manuscript. They're too large to be foundation stones, too featureless to be decorative. And yet, they're positioned as if part of a plan now lost to the desert wind. Some are upright, lodged deep in the ground. Others rest horizontally, like great tablets or doors sealed shut by time. Their angles are uncanny, their placements suspiciously deliberate. Most importantly, their presence isn't mirrored in any nearby site from the same period. They seem older, not just pre-Islamic or pre-classical, but pre-everything. They don't belong to history, they hover beneath it. Of course, archaeologists attribute them to earlier waves of settlement. Early South Arabian, they say, or pre-Sabaean. But the lack of tool marks, the absence of writing, and the sheer difficulty of transporting such megaliths without infrastructure casts long shadows on those tidy guesses. Locals offer other ideas: that the stones came from the sea, that they were left by beings from before the flood, that they mark graves not of humans, but of the first people, those who had no language, only memory. Sometimes, when the tide is low, similar blocks are said to emerge from the water, only to vanish again beneath the surf. Unverified, of course, but persistent. Kana's known past is rich enough to distract most visitors. That may be the point, because what lies beneath isn't just old, it's unwelcome. Like an earlier story, trying to claw its way out from beneath a well-behaved narrative. And now, we pivot from coastal whispers to inland myth. A stone said to move on its own, a turtle said to speak, a mystery too ridiculous to be true and far too stubborn to ignore. Hanoi's 1,000-year-old turtle stone, Vietnam, mythical origins. In the bustling heart of Vietnam's capital, amid modern traffic and ancient pagodas, sits a boulder with a name, a reputation, and a suspicious lack of fixed location. Hanoi's 1,000-year-old turtle stone is part geological oddity, part mythical relic, and entirely something that refuses to stay where it's put. Officially, it's just a boulder, a naturally weathered chunk of stone shaped vaguely like a turtle, revered by locals and cordoned off in whatever place it last decided to appear. Unofficially, it's a mobile entity, a trickster spirit, a petrified fragment of something older than even Vietnam's mythic golden turtle, the divine beast who once gifted a magical sword to King Le Loi. In fact, some say this is that turtle, or a piece of it, or its stone avatar, cursed to linger after the divine flesh returned to the lake. The problem is, no one can agree where the stone came from, or where it was last. Old records place it in different parts of the city, sometimes in parks, sometimes near temples, sometimes gone entirely. No one has ever witnessed it being moved. No crane, no cart, just sudden appearances and quiet absences, like a boulder with a travel plan. Local lore only adds fuel to the fire. They say the stone comes when Hanoi is in danger, that it appears in certain positions always facing a certain direction. That if you walk around it 3 times, you dream of drowning. Some claim it emits a strange hum on certain nights. Others swear that cameras glitch when pointed at it. One version says the turtle isn't a rock at all, but a laka seal placed over something beneath the city, something waiting to rise. Geologists offer the usual pareidolia, erosion, coincidence, but they don't explain the mobility, or the disappearing act, or the fact that no 2 eyewitnesses describe the same details. smooth in one account, cracked in another, sitting in a garden on Tuesday, gone by Thursday. This isn't just a sacred stone. It's a rumor made tangible, an ancient symbol doing its best impression of a ghost. And just when you think carvings can't get weirder than mobile turtles, we enter the realm of stelas, those proud, upright slabs of message and memory. Except this one, it says nothing we can read. But it says something. Phung Khak Khon Stale, Vietnam, enigmatic carvings. Somewhere in the wooded folds of rural Vietnam, far from Hanoi's tiled temples and tourist maps, stands a carved stone stele that doesn't belong. It's attributed to the scholar Phung Khak Khon, a respected historical figure from the 16th century. Except this stele is different. It's not just old, it's wrong, too precise, too enigmatic, too silent in all the ways that matter. At first glance, it's just a tall slab of rock weathered, moss-clung, half swallowed by time. But then the carvings begin to twist expectation. Symbols that don't match any known Vietnamese script. Characters that hover somewhere between stylized Chinese, Sanskrit, and complete invention. Some curves, some angles, all methodically placed, and none of them readable. Scholars argue over whether the markings are a cipher, a lost dialect, or a modern forgery aged by natural means. But the stone itself composition, patina, erosion, suggests age, real age. Pre-modern, possibly prehistoric. Which begs the uncomfortable question, if Phung Khak Khon commissioned it, what was he commemorating? Local elders don't care for the official attribution. To them, it's not the stele of a scholar, but a boundary marker, a monument not to people, but to something beneath, a seal, a warning. One myth says that the stone hums when lightning strikes nearby. Another claims that moss won't grow on one particular line of the carving, an invisible crack that traces all the way to its base. Some more daring explorers say the symbols are maps, not of geography, but of time. Others say they're instructions keys meant to be read only under specific celestial alignments. A few have even noticed that the symbols change in appearance depending on lighting different letters under sunrise versus moonlight. Of course, no one's managed to decipher anything, and attempts to digitally scan the carvings for translation have led to corrupted files, rendering glitches, and unexplained noise in audio recordings. Maybe it's all coincidence, maybe it's all weather and myth and overactive imagination, but the stone still stands, and it still refuses to speak in a language anyone understands. And just beyond the Vietnamese border, another mystery beckons. This time, it's not a carved monument, but massive rock forms that look sculpted by design, scattered in jungles where no design should exist. Unexplained rock formations in northern Laos, remote areas. Northern Laos is the kind of place that hides its secrets well. Dense forests, razor-edged mountains, villages so isolated they operate on calendars older than any emperor. It's a landscape that seems to actively discourage exploration, and maybe that's why the rock formations up there have stayed so comfortably mysterious. What we know is this: in the remotest parts of the Laotian Northwell, beyond the reach of maps, satellite signals, or even reliable folklore, there are reports of enormous, geometrically suggestive stone forms. Not clustered like temples, not aligned like monuments, just scattered, eerily deliberate, like punctuation marks dropped by a blind god. Some are cylindrical, others are oblong, tapering toward one end. Still others form rough pyramidal shapes flat on the base, triangular on all visible sides. All of them smooth in strange places, sharp in others. You'd think they were quarried until you realize there's no quarry, no chisel marks, no human trace at all. There are whispered stories from hunters and herders. They speak of stones that sing in fog, stones that move in the night, not in the theatrical sense, but by imperceptible degrees. A shift here, a tilt there, like they're adjusting their position for a better view of something you'll never see. Geologists, or at least the ones brave enough to look, default to natural formations, volcanic extrusion, glacial erratics, ancient erosion. But erosion doesn't typically carve stone into consistent geometric solids. Nature loves chaos. These shapes suggest intention. Even more unsettling, some of these formations appear to mimic tools, giant chisels, hammerheads, wedge shapes too symmetrical to be comfortably organic. Are they relics, models, or something else entirely? And what makes it worse, what makes it stick is that you can't map them. Every reported visit ends in a different location. Coordinates get scrambled, satellite imagery blurs, compasses misbehave. By the time you leave, you're not even sure you were there. In northern Laos, rocks are not just rocks. They're riddles, markers, or maybe leftovers from something so ancient, we stopped having words for it long before we started writing things down. And the Mekong, that ancient artery of culture and chaos, carries us next to its banks where stones speak in symbols. Symbols we shouldn't understand, but might. Mekong River rock art, Laos, Thailand border, very ancient, unusual figures. Along the sinuous, glinting spine of the Mekong River, carved into its banks and hidden behind vines, lies a forgotten library etched in stone. It's not a grand gallery more like a series of interruptions. Scratchings. Patterns. Artifacts of intention. These are the Mekong River petroglyphs. And they aren't just old. They're uncomfortable. At first, they look like what you'd expect from early hunter-gatherers. Human figures, animals, spirals. But stare longer, and something changes. The figures aren't just stylized. They're inaccurate. Intentionally so. Limbs bent at impossible angles, heads fused with torsos. Some creatures wear crowns. Others seem to be mid-transformation, part man, part insect, part geometry. And the spirals always the spirals, perfectly symmetrical, deeply grooved, often etched in series of 3s or 7s, numbers that seem to crop up again and again with no clear meaning. They appear next to star shapes, dot clusters, even one configuration that closely mimics the layout of the Orion constellation from 10,000 years ago. Dating these carvings is a forensic headache. Some may be 2,000 years old, others 5 times that. The river floods and recedes unpredictably, scouring evidence and erasing context. Tools used? Unknown. Carving method? Undocumented. Meaning? Stop asking. Locals regard them as sacred but not comforting. Messages, some say. Maps, others whisper. A few even claim the carvings change imperceptibly, yes, but over time. That new figures appear after floods, that some stones have patterns not visible under sunlight, only moonlight or starlight. One tale describes a traveler who traced the spirals with his finger and was found days later, mute and facing the river, eyes wide with something nobody wanted to name. And yet, the art refuses classification. Too symbolic for decoration, too abstract for storytelling, too consistent for randomness. They weren't made to be seen. They were made to be remembered by someone who isn't here anymore. The river flows on, uncaring. But downstream, among the highlands of Myanmar, more stones wait. Not carvings, this time, monoliths, standing alone like exiles. Solitary giants with no temple, no audience, and no excuse for still being there. Isolated megaliths in the Shan State, Myanmar. Shan State is a place of contradictions, vast and empty, yet heavily contested, remote, yet tangled in history. It's the kind of terrain that swallows both travelers and answers. And in its most inaccessible corners, far from villages and roads, monoliths rise in defiance of forgetting. There's no pattern, no park, no plaque, just stone giants planted into ridges, tucked into valleys, hidden under forest canopy like they're trying not to be found. Most are upright. Some are leaning. A few lie flat, half buried, like they gave up and decided to lie down for another 1,000 years. They're not shaped like gods or ancestors. No faces, no inscriptions, just raw stone, smoothed in places, chipped in others. But they're vertical, too vertical, standing without purpose, without a visible foundation, just there. Some appear in pairs, others alone. Local legends offer a handful of explanations. Ancient warriors turned to stone, cursed lovers, sky pillars driven into the ground to hold the earth steady. But the truth is always more evasive. These monoliths don't speak the language of myth. They just occupy space imposingly, impossibly. Attempts to measure and date them have failed, not because they're unmeasurable, but because no one has stayed long enough. The areas are too remote, too politically unstable, too heavy with silence. One surveyor reportedly set up camp near a particularly tall monolith and woke up to find his instruments dead, his watch frozen at 3:33 a.m., and his GPS blinking nonsense. As always, geologists suggest natural rock formations, basalt intrusions, vertical fractures. But no one explains the placement. Why only these stones? Why only in these spots? Why do some face the same direction or stand in alignment with stars that no longer rise where they once did? No answers, just shadows and standing stones. And as we venture deeper into Myanmar, the mystery intensifies not with carvings or monuments, but with stone cairns, massive ones, stacked with care, too many, too perfect, too forgotten to be accidental. Stone cairns of the Chin Hills, Myanmar. In the far west of Myanmar, where the land twists into jagged ranges and the clouds descend like ancient curtains, lie the Chin Hills, a region rarely visited and even less frequently understood. Here, among mist-choked forests and ridgelines that scrape the sky, stone cairns rise from the earth like fossilized intentions. They're big, they're deliberate, and no one can fully explain what they're doing here. Stacked stone by stone with alarming precision, many of these cairns reach over 2 meters in height. Some are conical, others cylindrical. A few taper into pyramid-like forms that feel oddly ceremonial. But they don't mark trails, they don't serve as boundary stones, and they're not just funerary markers, at least not the way we understand funerals. The sheer number of these cairns is staggering. Hundreds have been found, possibly thousands. And most are located in areas that would have required serious effort to access even today: steep slopes, isolated summits, jungle-throttled ravines. There's no apparent strategic advantage. They weren't defensive, they weren't agricultural, which leaves nothing. Or something else. What makes the mystery even stranger is the uniformity. Across villages, across elevations, across generations, the cairns follow a shockingly consistent blueprint. Same proportions, same orientation. Same stone type, often transported from miles away. That kind of standardization requires either central planning or a cultural memory far older and stronger than the tribes currently living there. Ask the locals, and you get answers both simple and unsettling. Some say they're markers for the souls of giants. Others claim each cairn houses a spirit not of the dead, but of the land itself. One tale tells of a time when the hills walked, and the stones were nailed into the earth to keep them from leaving. Attempts to study the cairns have been met with both environmental difficulty and political disinterest. Most records are incomplete, and many of the cairns remain uncharted, left to the vines, to the winds, and to whatever purpose they once served, or still serve. Because some cairns don't just stand, they watch. They face certain peaks. They line up across ridges like eyes trained on the horizon. And if the cairns in the Chin Hills feel like they're keeping a secret, the ones deeper in Myanmar whisper something even stranger. Because in the state of Karenni, the stones don't stand alone. They gather, and they might be more than stone. Karenni State Megaliths, Myanmar. Venture east into Kerinci State, and the forests deepen into something older, something hungrier. It's a region where borders blur between tribes, nations, and history itself. Here, in patches of unspoiled terrain, are megaliths that don't conform to the usual categories. They aren't just standing stones or ceremonial platforms. They're participants in a mystery still playing out. Some megaliths are arranged in rows, others in tight clusters. Many are anthropomorphic stone bodies with stubbed limbs and no faces. They lean together like conspirators frozen mid-whisper. Some even seem to tilt forward, as if waiting for instructions. They're rarely acknowledged by outsiders, and yet the locals know them, avoid them. Some villages won't build within sight of the megaliths. Not out of fear, exactly more like respect for something dangerous but dormant. What's strange is that these stones do not seem weathered. They sit in moist jungle air, lashed by monsoons, battered by time, and yet no moss, no cracks, no decay. As if the jungle itself is afraid to touch them. No carvings, no inscriptions, just form and placement, and form speaks louder than language. One formation appears to mimic a starburst. Another mimics a human spine. Some line up with seasonal sunrise points. Others form strange interlocking triangles that seem meaningless until you overlay constellations. And then there's the matter of movement. This isn't reported in scientific journals, of course, but locals insist. Some stones change positions. A few are said to hum when thunder rolls across the valley. One legend tells of a megalith that disappeared entirely during a lunar eclipse only, to return a week later with a different tilt. Satellite imagery has failed to catch any of this, naturally, but the stories persist. And they're told too calmly, too consistently, to dismiss entirely. You start to get the feeling that the Kerinci megaliths aren't ruins. They're waiting rooms, and we are intruding on an appointment not meant for us. Still, if standing stones that behave like living beings make you uneasy, you're not alone. Deeper into the rainforests of Borneo, stones don't just lean, they become creatures, beings, fossils of something mythical that may never have been alive and may never have died. Unusual stone formations in Kalimantan, Indonesia, remote interior. In the deep, humid arteries of Kalimantan's rainforest, where GPS signals vanish and ancient beliefs grow thick on the forest floor, there are stones that look too much like beings to be accidents. The Dayak people call them by many names, some rooted in legend, some in fear. But all point to the same unsettling reality. There are rock formations out here that resemble creatures, and no one knows why. They sit in clearings like statues, except they're not carved. No tool marks, no chisel lines, no symmetrical base. Just stone shapes with necks, torsos, mouths. Some look reptilian, others mammalian. A few look disturbingly human but melted, warped, caught mid-transformation, like a body frozen at the threshold between species. Geologists wave it off. Volcanic tuff, wind erosion, unusual mineral patterns. But even they admit the forms are peculiar. Some of these shapes are repeated across milestone heads, peeking from riverbanks, mirrored poses in distant valleys, as though whatever made them had a favorite design. One stone near the upper Kapuas is shaped like a coiled serpent devouring its tail. A perfect Ouroboros, 10 feet across, resting in a natural amphitheater of trees that lean outward, not inward, as if repelled. No one camps there, not even animals, not even insects. There are stories, of course there are, that these are petrified beings, not statues, not symbols, remains. Some say they're the fossilized bodies of forest spirits struck down in ancient wars. Others say they were once alive in a different sense of the word, creatures made, not of flesh, but of something denser, slower, more permanent, Some even claim they still think in a way we can't detect. The most disturbing theory? That these stones are incomplete. That what we see is just the visible part of something buried beneath the soil, like a single scale on the back of a creature still sleeping underground, waiting. Few researchers go there. The terrain is brutal, the politics complicated. But every so often, a photograph leaks out blurry, grainy, strange, a stone that shouldn't exist, a shape that looks back. And just beyond these myths, across the water, lie caves, massive ones, filled not with fossils but with geometry. Paths that weren't meant to be carved, but were anyway. For reasons long since swallowed by stone, Sarawak cave structures, Malaysia, unexplained rock features. Deep within the limestone labyrinths of Borneo's Sarawak region, where bats fill the air and the jungle eats time like candy, lie caves that whisper of more than darkness. These caverns massive, echoing, ancient air, not just natural voids. Some of them hold secrets that refuse to categorize themselves. Geometric scars in the stone, flat plains where none should exist, pathways that feel made. Take a walk through these underground worlds, and you'll find passages that defy the sloppiness of erosion, perfect angles, walls that meet the floor with suspicious crispness, stone steps descending in too precise gradients, platforms that seem designed, not discovered. Some areas appear so well squared, you'd think they were the basements of forgotten temples until you remember no temples were ever built here, not above, not anywhere. Scientists will tell you, limestone erodes in fascinating ways. Water drips, calcite deposits, stalactites form, but even they blink twice at certain formations. One chamber in particular features a hallway straight, narrow, and impossibly level stretching nearly 60 meters. No curves, no roughness. Just a stone corridor, as if the earth itself once had architecture ambitions. And then there are the etchings, not carvings, not paintings, just faint grooves on the stone, barely visible, patterns that look too symmetrical to be accidental. Hexagonal grids, repeated chevrons, arrow-like forms pointing toward nothing or maybe toward something long gone. They aren't decoration, they're residue, the fossilized fingerprints of forgotten intentions. Local guides speak of spirits in the caves, of course, but not malevolent ones. Watchers, architects, maybe. There are stories of people vanishing only to reappear years later, unchanged and confused, claiming they'd simply taken a wrong turn. Others mention lights glowing, darting, always at the edge of vision. Some say the caves breathe, not metaphorically, literally, as if they're alive. And you can't shake the feeling, walking these routes, that someone or something was here before building, shaping, hiding. These aren't just caves, they're structures disguised as voids. Blueprints in limestone. Which brings us to Sabah, farther north, where things get even stranger. Because there, in the highlands, circles of stone appear out of nowhere. No names, no explanations. Just alignments waiting to be misinterpreted. Sabah stone circles, Malaysia less known sites. In the seldom trodden interior of Sabah, Malaysian Borneo's wild heart, the trees give way occasionally not to villages or roads, but to puzzles, stone circles. Quiet, perfect, inconvenient puzzles. These are not sacred spaces with shrines or grave goods. They're not surrounded by mythology. In fact, they're barely surrounded by acknowledgement at all. Most people don't even know they exist. But they do. Rings of stone, some large, some small, some nearly buried, always round, always intentional. They aren't the chaotic scatterings of river rock or the collapsed outlines of huts. They are clean, purposeful, often placed in impossible terrain, steep slopes, dense forest, areas difficult to even stand inlet, alone construct geometrically accurate enclosures. Some consist of upright stones like teeth forming a perfect mouth. Others lie flat, forming perfect circumference on the forest floor. Still others feature a central stone, larger than the rest, as if playing the role of a heart, or a hub, or a forgotten altar. Their dimensions vary, but their logic does not. Each one whispers the same impossible suggestion. Someone measured this. Ask around, and even the locals seem unsure. Some say they're markers, others avoid them altogether. One old hunter claimed the circles were doors, but not to places you could walk to. Another joked that they were the campfires of giants who never returned. When pressed, most just shrug. Old stones, they say, not ours. No one has found tools, bones, or pottery near them. No artifacts, no evidence of occupation, just stone, arranged with maddening precision. And, sometimes, a subtle alignment with celestial events: sunrise on the equinox, the full moon in August, the arc of Orion. Geologists are mostly silent. These sites are underfunded, undocumented, and inconveniently placed. There's no profit in mapping what no one believes. But those who've gone privately quietly return with a strange expression. One of those looks that says, "I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't normal." The circles are too perfect to ignore and too purposeless to explain, like notes from a musical scale we've forgotten how to play. And then, just beyond the sea, the rock formations get bolder, sharper, more theatrical. On the shores of Palawan, stone takes the form of myth and teeth. The dragon teeth of Palawan, Philippines, natural but uncanny formations, jutting out from the shores and caves of Palawan, like the spine of something slumbering just beneath the skin of the earth, are the so-called dragon teeth monolithic limestone spires with edges so sharp and profiles so deliberate. They feel less like nature and more like intention given shape. Locals name them not for geology, but for what they feel like. The exposed jawline of a beast no one's ever seen alive. These rock formations aren't just large, they're vicious. Long, vertical blades of stone, serrated and narrow, often positioned in symmetrical rows along cave mouths, cliff edges, and high ridges. They resemble fangs, spines, the weaponized bones of something prehistoric or mythic. Not the gentle curves of erosion, but the cold edges of punishment. Geologists, of course, blame karstification limestone dissolved by acidic water over millennia, forming spires and needles, but the degree of symmetry is disturbing. Some of these teeth are arranged in arcs, like jaws frozen mid-bite. Others appear to trace spiral patterns, or mirror each other across river channels. Natural, maybe, but not innocent. In one cave near Tete, a row of these spires descends like a staircase into darkness, each one decreasing in height by the same margin. It looks carved, it looks measured, but no one claims credit. Local folklore fills in the gaps left by science. These formations, they say, are the teeth of the Bakunawa sea dragon defeated and scattered across the islands. Others claim the rocks are guardians, warning signs, territorial markers left by beings who once ruled from under the sea. Some stories say they still do. Visitors often describe strange acoustics near the formations. Echoes don't bounce the way they should. Whispers carry too far. Some report feelings of vertigo or pressure changes. Others rarely claim to hear a low hum, like breath pulled through fangs. The dragon teeth don't invite study, they challenge it. They stand as monuments to something long gone or merely waiting to return. And as you move further inland, you'll find something just as unsettling: solitary stones that aren't jagged or theatrical, but simply there, huge, alone, and perfectly wrong. The monoliths of Mindanao. Mindanao Island monoliths, Philippines, isolated finds. Scattered across the thick jungles and mist-draped highlands of Mindanao are monoliths that have no place in the island's archaeological record, and even less in its memory. These are not parts of temples, not boundary markers, and certainly not modern art projects lost in the weeds. They are massive, upright, solitary stones, sometimes standing, sometimes fallen, placed in areas so remote and untouched that even local tribes avoid them. These stones do not belong, not geologically, not narratively. Many are clearly not from the immediate environment, composed of different mineral compositions than surrounding rock. In some cases, they appear to have been moved across valleys or elevated ridges, despite weighing multiple tons. And for what? There are no carvings, no graves beneath them, no settlements nearby. Just stone, clean, silent, present. They're often found alone, as if each one is exiled from something greater. No clusters, no circles, just singular anomalies. A 10-foot-tall slab perched on a slope with no visible erosion base. A round-topped pillar in the middle of dense forest, far from any trail, path, or reason. Some are smooth on one side, almost polished, while others are rough and unworked. The inconsistency suggests intent, not decoration, or tool use, but perhaps misdirection. Local lore varies, depending on the region. Some tribes believe the stones are the remnants of ancient sky ladders, cut down when the gods were betrayed. Others say they mark the locations where spirits emergedor, where they were sealed away. The more animist communities believe these stones choose where to stand, and when. They speak of monoliths appearing after storms or disappearing entirely when no one is watching. What they all agree on: don't touch them, don't lean against them, don't speak their names out loud, assuming they have names to begin with. Archaeologists rarely visit these sites. Logistics aside, they're simply too out of place to fit within any defined era or known culture of Mindanao. And when something doesn't fit, it's easier to ignore it. To walk past the massive stone in the jungle and pretend it's just a boulder, as if boulders often stand upright, balanced perfectly, facing celestial alignments. And the land isn't done yet, because in Vietnam's central highlands, entire walls of rock appear where no wall should be. Layers of stone too straight, too level, and far too insistent on forming structures in a place where no one built anything at all. Unexplained rock walls of Vietnam's central highlands. Vietnam's central highlands are a place of deep red soil, thick green canopy, and stories that predate maps. It's a region of quiet isolation, rolling hills, ancient plateaus, and the subtle weight of things that came before. And scattered across this landscape, in places too remote for convenience and too strategic for coincidence, lie walls of stone. Natural? Possibly, but they don't act like it. Some are long and straight, unnaturally running for dozens of meters without deviation, slicing through terrain that has no reason to be so accommodating. Others form corners, cross-sections, layers, stacked like sediment, but tilted with such precision it looks like tectonic origami. You stumble into one of these formations and think, someone built this. Then you look closer and wonder, but why? These formations have no mortar, no tool marks, and no logical function. They aren't fortifications. They don't demarcate fields or protect anything. They're too remote to be ancient fences, too massive to be accidental. And the stone itself often seems out of place, darker, denser, sharper edged than local geology would suggest. Local tribes have stories, of course. Walls built by giants, barriers thrown down by gods during a time of separation when humans were not yet bound by gravity. Some say the stones mark old battles, petrified remains of barricades between spirits that fought before time began. Others don't even try to explain. They just leave offerings at the base and walk away. A few formations appear to align with cardinal directions. One particularly troubling site forms a perfect rectangle 20 meters across, framed by stones, half buried but still visible, like the bones of a buried plaza. No artifacts inside, no soil disturbance. just negative space defined by rocks too symmetrical to be natural and too purposeless to be man-made. Geologists argue erosion, fault lines, volcanic shifts. And maybe they're right, but it's hard to shake the sense that these formations aren't just natural quirks. They feel intended. As if someone or something used stone as a language we no longer speak, or as blueprints for structures that exist in forms we don't yet understand. And if you thought stone walls were unsettling, wait until you see an entire forest made of stone. Thousands of towering spires, sharpened like knives, carved not by hand, but by something worse, time itself with a cruel sense of geometry. The stone forest of Yunnan, China, natural but enigmatic formations. In Yunnan, China, there's a place where stone pretends to be life. A forest made not of wood, but of sharpened limestone. Pillars stretch skyward like petrified trees, frozen mid-growth, forever rooted in a terrain that looks sculpted by gods with an eye for intimidation. This is the stone forest Shailen. And though it's marketed as a tourist destination, its deeper layers remain unsettlingly obscure. From above, the formations resemble city streets, narrow corridors between towering blades, alleyways without buildings, paths without destinations. Some spires are 30 meters tall. Others are squat and twisted, like malformed sentinels. Together, they create the illusion of architecture, except there's no builder. Geologists have an answer, of course. Karst topography, water-dissolving limestone over millions of years. But nature doesn't usually create in straight lines, or symmetrical spirals, or recurring hexagonal gaps. Nature loves chaos. These rocks love pattern. Some sections of the forest form near-perfect rows. Others create what can only be described as plaza-scleared areas surrounded by sharply defined edges, with spires forming silent perimeters. At night, shadows play tricks. At noon, light filters in at sharp angles, carving hieroglyphs into the ground. People have reported strange sounds, hear whispers, breathing, the crack of stone when no one's near it. And then there are the formations shaped like people, or at least, like memories of people. One cluster is called the Ashima stones, said to resemble a woman turned to rock. But there are others, unacknowledged, half hidden behind spire shapes with arms, torsos, heads, watching. Some say the formations are growing, very slowly, that new spires appear, or shift, or tilt, that the forest isn't static, but evolving at a pace so slow we can't perceive it, like a glacier that's learned to sculpt mythology. Local legends claim this was once a city, not metaphorically, but literally. A stone city swallowed by the earth, its towers left behind like bone fragments. Others say the stones were people, turned to rock during a celestial judgment, and a few whisper the stones are waiting for something to rise, to return, to be reactivated. From here, we circle back to Japanto, a place that mirrors another mystery we've already met. A twin site, a land-based sibling to an underwater enigma, and possibly the missing half of a forgotten blueprint. Saninudai, Japan. Perched on the rugged coastline of Yonaguni Island, that Yonaguni Saninudai is the strange, overlooked sibling to the far more famous underwater monument that lurks offshore. But here, on dry land, the mystery gets worse, because unlike its submerged counterpart, Saninudai can't be dismissed as a diving illusion or deep-sea pareidolia. It's right there, in full view, and it's just as weird. The formation consists of large sandstone steps, broad, flat, and alarmingly consistent. They rise in linear tiers, cleanly cut, with edges that look too sharp to be the result of random erosion. Some steps are so uniformly spaced they resemble stadium seating. Others are sloped just enough to suggest intent, as though designed to lead or direct. But to what, and for whom, no one knows. Geologists argue that this is a natural formation caused by weathering and tectonic shifts, horizontal strata fracturing along joints, wave action, the usual suspects. But even they admit the lines are a little too clean, the angles a little too deliberate, the feeling, standing there, a little too architectural. And the location? Inconvenient, remote, exposed to violent ocean storms, yet strangely intact. There are no known temples or settlements nearby. No tools have been found. No signs of a human hand yet. Everything about the site feels like a construction, something built out of the land rather than on top of it. Then there's the twist, the uncanny resemblance to the Yonaguni monument itself. Same stepped patterns, same angular design language. As if both were built from the same set of instructions sewn above water, one below. That fact alone has ignited theories, that the two are connected, that the land and sea structures once formed a single complex, that Yonaguni wasn't sunk by nature, but buried by time. Locals call Saninudai sacred. Some believe the steps were used by celestial beings. Others say it's where spirits gather during specific moon phases, when the sea answers. And there are stories, quiet ones, of people going missing near the site, or hearing footsteps on stone when no one is there. It's a place that offers the illusion of understanding. You think it's just a bunch of rocks, but stand on those steps too long, and you start to feel like you're not alone. And if Saninudai feels like a message carved in stone, the next site is even harder to pin down. Because the structures aren't just on land, they're underwater, invisible to the naked eye, and no one can even agree if they exist at all. Submerged structures off Taiwan. Unconfirmed reports. Just off the coast of Taiwan, beneath the shifting currents and occasional typhoons, lie whisper shaft stories and speculative sonar images of something that shouldn't be there. Submerged structures. Not reefs, not rocks, but shapes, linear, geometric, unnatural, or so say the divers, fishermen, and quietly obsessive researchers who've spent years trying to prove what the ocean keeps trying to hide. There is no official name, no government survey, no recognized expedition. Just reports. Fragments. Descriptions of blocks stacked like underwater terraces, stair-like formations on the seabed, ridges too straight and too parallel to be natural formations. Some say it looks like a sunken causeway. Others, a grid of foundations like the skeleton of a city drowned before the first known settlement of Taiwan. The skeptics are loud. It's just tectonic shaping, a trick of sediment and light. People see what they want to see, but the descriptions persist and they're too consistent to ignore. Multiple sources, separated by decade, describe similar details. Sharp corners, symmetrical depressions, even what appear to be channels or troughs, as if part of a plumbing or drainage system far below the surface. The currents make exploration nearly impossible. Visibility drops without warning. Equipment malfunctions. GoPros return with blank footage. Some divers report sudden disorientation near the site, as though something is pushing them off course. Others say they hear a humming, a low, throbbing vibration felt more than heard. There are no artifacts, no carbon samples, no relics of civilization. But then again, no one's ever been down there long enough to look. It's a mystery held hostage by geography. Some fringe theorists tie it to Yonaguni. Others claim it's part of a vast Pacific-wide network, remnants of a pre-Ice Age civilization that was systematically submerged as the sea reclaimed its secrets. Others still believe the structures are not human at all, that they were never meant to be seen, only sensed. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of the mystery is how little anyone seems to want to solve it. There are no headlines, no documentaries, just rumors. Like the sea itself is keeping a secret and everyone knows better than to pry too hard. And yet, sometimes the secrets rise anyway. Like in Fiji, where a mountain isn't a mountain, but a giant, a sleeping one. The sleeping giant rock formation, Fiji, technically Oceania but culturally linked to Asia. On the edge of Nadi in Fiji, Nestled between sugarcane fields and gentle hills, lies a mountain range shaped like a man, a giant to be exact. Broad forehead, nose, chin, chest all laid out with uncanny anatomical accuracy, as if a titan had fallen asleep and was slowly turning to stone. Locals call it the sleeping giant. Tourists snap photos and move on. But the myths linger, and they're not just metaphorical. To the naked eye, the formation is too precise. The facial contours align with real human proportions. The limbs match joint spacing. From the right vantage point, the illusion is perfect. But that's all it is, right? An illusion. A happy accident of geology. Except, no one knows how old the formation is, and local oral tradition doesn't treat it like a trick of nature. It treats it like a body, a being, a god. Some say he fell in battle and never rose. Others say he sleeps on purpose guarding something beneath him. There are stories of tremors felt only in the nearby valleys, never anywhere else. Of animals refusing to climb past his shoulders. Of dreams that become communal when people sleep near his feet. The stone itself is resistant to erosion, peculiarly so. Parts of the formation remain smooth despite years of tropical weather. Other sections appear almost layered, as if placed, stacked. Not formed by volcanic pressure, but assembled, like armor or containment. Geologists dismiss these ideas outright. They cite weathering, tectonic uplift, the usual suspects. But even they struggle with the angles, with the proportions, with how something can look so human without ever having been touched by one. Some native elders believe the giant is alive, in a way we no longer understand, that the stone is not his tomb, but his shield. That when the world becomes strange enough, again when humans forget everything and start to remember, the giant will rise, and not kindly. Whatever he is, he lies silent now, covered in green, watching. And on another island, not far from the ancient home of Homo floresiensis, a different kind of giant waits not in slumber, but in silence, carved into stone, smiling, mocking, watching. Megaliths of Flores, Indonesia, enigmatic figures. On the remote island of Flores, famous for its ancient small-bodied human relative, Homo floresiensis, there's another mystery entirely. One not buried in caves or bones, but staring straight at you from the open landscape. Stone figures, silent, weathered, and strange. They're not monuments in the traditional sense. They're not part of temples or tombs. They're just there. And they seem to know something. The megaliths of Flores are scattered mostly around the inland highlands, often near modern villages that have stopped pretending they understand them. Some are humanoid, others are not. A few are just tall, vertical slabs, but with subtle, unsettling feature shints of a face, a curl of a lip, two depressions that might be eyes or might be mistakes. But even the most primitive-looking ones have presence, a gravity that pulls your gaze and doesn't let go. Some figures are squatting. Some have their hands on their knees or crossed over their chests. A few smile, others grimace. None are identical, yet they all seem to follow a logic that no one's decoded. Were they meant to honor ancestors, gods, spirits? No one agrees. In fact, no one's even sure how old they are. Some say 500 years, others say 5,000. The lichen won't give up its secrets. And then there's the material. These aren't local river stones or volcanic rubble. Many were clearly transported from elsewhere, often uphill, across rugged terrain. For what? The figures don't guard anything. They don't mark graves. They just sit often in awkward clusters, too far from settlements to be functional, too close to ignore. Local legends offer fractured explanations. That the stones were once people elders turned to rock for betraying tribal secrets. That they are guardians, warning markers to stay away from certain lands. that they were built by Ebu Gogo, mythical small people with big bellies and long arms who once ruled the forests. Some even say the stones were gifts left behind by sky visitors who came before the island knew language. Whatever the truth, these figures aren't passive. Spend enough time near them and you'll feel it, that dull hum in your bones, that uncanny sense of being seen. And from one island of stone watchers, we sail to another where ancient rituals left behind monoliths so large, no one today can move them or explain them, not even their descendants. Tanah Toraja megaliths, Sulawesi, Indonesia, ancient origins of some. The people of Tanah Toraja are known for their elaborate funerary custom shanging coffins, cliff burials, wooden effigies of the dead. But there's another layer to this highland culture, one that doesn't get as many postcards or anthropology documentaries: the megaliths. Towering, weathered, unmoving. They're called menhirs by some, sanggul batu by others, but no matter the name, they all share one trait: they don't fit. The modern Toraja still honor these stones, placing new ones during funerals of the wealthy. But the oldest megaliths? No one remembers who placed them. Some are so large they dwarf the structures around them. 10, 15 feet tall, weighing several tons, balanced with uncanny stability in soft, rain-prone soil. With no lifting equipment, no levers, just legends. They're often found near ranta ceremonial fields arranged in seemingly chaotic but possibly astronomically significant patterns. Some stand alone, others form partial circles, like unfinished calendars. The older stones are darker, almost melted in texture, worn smooth by generations of rain. The newer ones, added more recently, stand brighter and somehow sadder, because they don't match. Not in size, not in symmetry, not in mystery. The oral histories do what they can. Some say the stones mark the number of buffaloes sacrificed for a soul's journey to the afterlife. Others claim they are doorways, or spirits, or the dead themselves, still standing, still watching. But when asked about the biggest, oldest stones, the ones that don't line up with any family, any name, any story, answers go quiet. Archaeologists suggest a long cultural continuity, that these traditions go back thousands of years, but there's a rupture in that narrative, an archaeological silence that no one can explain. The oldest stones seem to predate agriculture. Some are made from rock not native to the valleys they stand in. The transport remains a mystery. So does the motivation. Local shamans say the stones listen, that if you sleep near one, you'll dream of voices not in words, but in images, geometric shapes, fractals, spirals of stars. One tale describes a man who traced the cracks in an ancient stone and spent the rest of his life trying to replicate what he saw in his sleep. From Toraja's mystic stone guardians, we now climb toward the edge of the known world into the mountains of Pakistan, where the rocks are too big, too placed, and far too alone to be called natural. Unidentified structures in northern Pakistan, remote mountainous regions. In the jagged wilderness of northern Pakistan, where the Hindu Kush and the Karakoram ranges clash like sleeping giants, there are stones that simply don't add up. Massive boulders perched in precarious places. Arrangements of rocks that mimic walls, but with no enclosure. Solitary monoliths set into the mountainside like exclamation points from an author who never wrote anything else. No one talks about them. They're not marked on any tourist map. Not even the locals say much. Just nods, shrugs, maybe a quick folk story: giants, jinn, mountain spirits. You can feel it, standing near one of these structures. The silence gets heavier. The air thins, not from altitude, but from the absence of context. Some of the stones form steps, huge ones, too uniform for rockfall, too spread out to be random. One particular formation winds its way up a cliffside, vanishing into snow. Geologists say it's a collapsed shelf, but climbers who've stood on it say it's too deliberate, like someone or something intended it as a stairway to nothing. Then there are the solitary slabs, angular, upright, set into the rock like anchors for a structure that never got built or vanished long ago. Many are surrounded by smaller stones, almost like offerings. But there's no religious tradition here, no markers, no signs of human touch, just the cold suggestion of order. These aren't places people live, they're places people avoid, too high, too exposed, too unkind. And yet, the stones persist, through avalanches, earthquakes, generations of forgetfulness. Satellite imagery occasionally captures what looks like linear pathlines of stones across valleys, disappearing beneath glaciers. No official expedition has followed them. Too remote, too dangerous, too unimportant. But some stories bleed through, of climbers who've seen lights flicker along these paths, of voices echoing off the stone not carried by wind, but by something deeper, of travelers who get lost, even with maps and GPS, and find themselves standing in front of the same monolith over and over again. No one has explained these structures. No one really tries. They sit on the edge of our understanding, like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence too old to read. And just beyond those icy cliffs, in the steppes of Inner Mongolia, strange forms rise again. Not giants, this time, but fairies, and not soft, ethereal ones. These ones are carved in stone, and they remember. Fairy rocks of Inner Mongolia, China, natural but unusual forms. In the wind-blown lonely reaches of Inner Mongolia, where the steppe unfurls like a faded parchment and the clouds stretch out like sleeping beasts, you'll find stone formations with names that sound delicate but feel anything but. The locals call them fairy rocks, not because they're quaint or charming, because they're watching. Scattered across the region's hills and plateaus are boulders and spires that resemble living beings caught mid-metamorphosis. Stone figures with arched backs, twisted limbs, empty sockets where eyes might have been if eyes ever belonged to them. Some sit perched on ridges as if waiting for a signal that hasn't come in centuries. Others are half buried, hunched, as though trying to pull themselves free from the earth that swallowed them. Geologists will tell you, wind erosion, sandblasting, freeze, thaw cycles, nature shaping stone over eons with random elegance. But that's just the beginning of the story. Because the shapes aren't just random, they repeat. Over miles of terrain, similar postures, similar proportions. Some have even been found aligning with lunar events or the summer solstice, as though part of a larger, fragmented design. Ask around, and the folklore spills out in strange, fragmented whispers. These aren't fairies like the winged things of European myth. They're beings of the old stories. Creatures from the first dreams of the earth. Some say they were messengers turned to stone for failing their mission. Others claim they are the land, pulled into shape by old desires and left behind when the world changed frequencies. One chilling tale speaks of a traveler who followed the rocks for days, thinking they were marking a trail. On the seventh day, he realized they were moving. Not walking, just repositioning. Watching from new angles. And by the time he found his way out, there were no footprints but his own. There are no carvings, no artifacts, no explanation for how stone can feel posed, just rocks that remember shapes and seem to be waiting for someone to recognize them. And further south, in Thailand, another shape waits sewn less humanoid, but just as loaded with meaning. A turtle. Stone-shelled, immovable, and tied to something far older than geology, myth, and prophecy. The stone turtles of Thailand, natural but culturally significant. In certain corners of rural Thailand, often far from temples and tourist routes, there are rocks shaped like turtles, not cartoonishly so, not obvious at first glance. But the more you look, the harder it becomes to deny. The curve of a shell, the suggestion of a head, the stub of a leg, these aren't boulders, they're beings. Or at least, that's how they've always been treated. Some are massive 15 feet long, resting on plateaus or nestled in shallow forest clearings. Others are more subtle, hidden in undergrowth or half absorbed by the soil. The people who live near them don't question their presence. They build shrines beside them, leave offerings, tie ribbons to small trees growing nearby. And they speak of the turtles not as symbols, but as entities, guardians, witnesses, memory. Geologists, as always, enter the chat with erosion and mineral content. Coincidence, they say. Pareidolia, they say. But the frequency of these formations show often they appear near ancient paths, near rivers considered sacred, near forgotten village ruin starts to stretch coincidence into something else. If it's random, it's suspiciously poetic. In Thai cosmology, turtles are not just animals, they are cosmic symbols. The world itself is sometimes said to rest on the back of a great turtle. Time moves in the rhythm of its breath. Longevity, patience, rebirth, all carried in the slow geometry of its shell. But these stones aren't soft symbols, they feel deliberate. One in particular, near the Eisen region, has a hollow beneath it barely wide enough for a child to crawl through. And yet, when someone does, they say the turtle sings, not in melody, but in a resonant hum, as if the stone is vibrating with a frequency that doesn't belong to our decade or century. Others report dreams after visiting the turtles, recurring images of floods, of stars falling, of turtles rising, massive and slow, to pull something broken back into balance. There are no carvings on these stones, no inscriptions, but they are surrounded by stories, and that's sometimes more dangerous, because stories, unlike fossils, don't stay buried, they evolve. And that, dear viewer, brings us to the end of our long, strange, pilgrimage 50 ancient structures, too mysterious for modern man, too stubborn to vanish, structures that shouldn't exist. And yet, do. Stone does not lie, but it doesn't explain itself either. It just waits, buried, staring, whispering a language we once knew before we traded myth for measurement, silence for explanation, and awe for certainty.